I'm going to give everybody a few minutes, rather a few seconds to come on in and join us, and we'll get started momentarily. All right. Good afternoon and welcome to today's NASPO hosted Procurement IQ Training webinar. We're glad you're here and thank you for spending some time with us. At the close of today's presentation, you'll be asked to complete a very brief questionnaire. Your feedback is very valuable to us here at NASPO. Today's presentation is good for one contact hour. To get your certificate, simply complete the questionnaire following the presentation. This is a webinar for NASPO State Central Procurement Office members. We want you to capitalize on your NASPO membership this year by using this excellent tool, Procurement IQ, and by checking out the other great resources that NASPO provides at naspo.org. You can catch up with our blog, the NASPO Pulse, for the latest articles and podcast episodes, and watch your inbox for more information on other products coming soon. Once again, I do want to reiterate that this is specifically aimed at NASPO state members. That is simply because NASPO provides access to Procurement IQ to that subset of members. If that does not cover you, you are still more than welcome to stay, observe, learn, interact, and maybe take that information that you get here back to your office, your organization, and you can ask them to pursue a subscription to Procurement IQ. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to explain the format of today's webinar. All attendees are muted. If you'd like to ask our presenters a question, you can type it into the Q&A box at the bottom of your window. You can also enter comments and questions in the chat box. Our presenter today is Procurement IQ Senior Relationship Manager Diane Yu, originally from Pittsburgh, now living in Los Angeles, where Procurement IQ is headquartered. She has over 5 years experience with the company. We're also joined in a supporting role today by Senior Relationship Manager Kalia Canley from Melbourne, Australia, and now in Los Angeles with 10 years experience working with Procurement IQ. She'll be there to take some questions in the Q&A box and help out in the chat. So I'd like to start out today by getting to know a little bit about our audience. We'd like to know how much experience you have with Procurement IQ. So you're about to see a polling question appear on your screen. So have you ever used Procurement IQ for market research? Simple yes or no. Give it a few more seconds as the answers are coming in. All right, it looks like pretty good split in the audience here. More than half of you have been on Procurement IQ before. So let's dig down on that just a little bit more. How frequently do you use Procurement IQ? Are we regular, every couple of weeks, once a month, or just every so often as the need arises? something that rarely gets incorporated into your procurements, or you've never seen it, never heard of it, don't know how you got here today. All right, let's look at those results. Looks like 12% of you regular users, about a third of you occasionally, and a little over a third have not been on the platform. Perfect. Well, hopefully today can shed some light on all the useful information that you can find there. Now that we know a little bit about you, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our presenter today. Diane, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Chadwick, and thanks for having us here. We're very happy to be presenting today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Chadwick, I may need permissions from you to do so. Okay, just a quick check there. Can everyone see my screen? Maybe a quick thumbs up from somebody would be great.
You're good.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you. And hi, everyone. My name is Diane. As Chadwick mentioned, Kali and I, we are both senior relationship managers here at Procurement IQ. We are also the dedicated points of support for all NASPO members. You guys do have access to our tool through your NASPO membership. So definitely really excited to give you all a quick introduction and overview of the resource for those of you who might be new to us. For those of you who have been with us a little bit, hopefully this will serve as a good refresher. We're going to just kind of talk through some updates as well as some common use cases and just generally share some best practices for application. So just a little bit of background, Procurement IQ, we are a market intelligence tool that's designed for procurement and sourcing teams. So we have a database of over 1,000 category reports that focus on a variety of different products and services that you may be sourcing. These are all standardized reports, and we're going to go through them in a little bit more detail once we go onto the site today. And they all contain detailed information around things like pricing, vendors, as well as negotiation and contracting best practices. We've also added some recent new global content in there to further give some perspective on global supply chains. And so all of this information is available to help you guys hopefully save a lot of time in your research as you're going through various sourcing activities that you might be doing, whether it's solicitations or contract renewals, so that you can spend your time more strategically with your internal stakeholders and help reduce the risks and costs that are associated with your contracts. In addition to the online resource, which by the way, you guys can all access through your unified state logins if you are a NASPO member. If anyone has any issues or questions around access, you can feel free to reach out to myself or Kalia directly, and we can help assist with that. We are also here to provide, any training such as this one, as well as just ongoing support. So should you have any questions, whether it's about access or about the content or material, or if you are working on a specific sourcing project and you'd like to kind of understand what information we have available and how you might be able to utilize that, you can always feel free to reach out to us directly. We can always sync up with you individually to get you as much information as possible. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump onto the site. So when you log into Procurement IQ through your state login, this is going to be your home page. Kalia and mine contact information is always going to be in this upper right-hand corner. So as you're going through the tool, if you do have any questions, you can quickly shoot us both a quick email, and one of us will get back to you as soon as possible. I see a quick hand raise here, so I just wanted to see if anyone has any initial questions before we jump into the demonstration. No? Okay. All right. Well, we'll try and keep an eye out here. If anyone does have any questions, please feel free to unmute themselves to ask, or you feel free to drop a message in the Q&A. We'll try and respond to those as we go along. Okay, so from the home page, there's a couple of ways you can go about looking for a report that's relevant for you. As I mentioned, we do have a pretty large database of category reports, so we cover over 1,000 categories. There's going to be a pretty wide breadth of different products and services, some of which may align with the things that you're supporting. So to get to, an appropriate report, the most kind of straightforward way is to search by keyword. So if you're working on a specific contract and you know exactly what it is that you're looking for, you can just search by keyword, whether it's a product or service, directly in this main search bar. It will bring up a query of any related titles that might be a good fit. And then from there, you can select the ones that you would like to dive a little bit deeper into. Alternatively, you can also click on this All Report link, which is in the popular links section on the home page. This will give you a list view of every single title that currently lives in our collection. At the very top, you'll see that it's separated into 47 different market sectors. And then depending on the sector that you're managing, you can dive into that section, which will then bring you a list view of all of the various categories that fall under that sector. So for example, I just jumped into the building and facility construction and maintenance service sector. This brings us to a number of different services that fall within it. So from here, let's say we would maybe like to take a look at, for today's example, I am going to simply select one of these for us to go through. I'll select landscape maintenance services. So as we are going through the sample, now keep in mind that all of our reports are standardized in format. So regardless of what category you guys might be looking at in future, whether it's IT, software, whether it's a piece of equipment or component, or if it's a service, whether it's professional services or anything that might be related, they're all going to follow the same format and chapters. So we just want to make sure we get you familiarized with how to navigate the tool, how to find the pieces of data that you need as efficiently as possible. So with that in mind, we're just going to go through this report as a sample today and kind of talk through some very common use cases and what kind of information you can expect to find and apply to your day-to-day workflow. So firstly, before we kind of get started on the use cases, I do want to point out a couple of functionality buttons. You can download the full report if you'd like here. There's a little download button if you'd like to access the PDF offline. You're more than welcome to do so. That will allow you to either save or print it out. I will, kind of preface that by saying that the online version is definitely a lot more easily navigatable. So, it's the easiest way to kind of go through the report because you can jump from chapter to chapter very quickly. You can also be sure that you're always looking at the most up-to-date information, as our reports are monitored and reviewed for updates on a monthly basis. Now, from here, you'll see that each report has 5 main chapters. And one of the first things that I wanted to talk about today is the opportunity assessment chapter. So this is a really great starting point for anyone who might be at the early stages of a category strategy development. And maybe you're just trying to get a full understanding of what is generally happening in this market, some kind of macroeconomic trends, and just getting an idea of what direction you might want to go with a specific sourcing project. So this first chapter is going to serve as an introductory chapter and give you a CPO level overview of the market, if you will, starting with a quick summary of what exactly is being discussed in this report, what it includes or excludes, as well as a list of related titles that could be helpful for you. Next up, we're going to have an executive summary view of some of those key data points within the report. So you'll see things like price trends and forecast, top vendors, cost drivers. All of these various factors or key data points will actually have dedicated chapters within the rest of the report that dive into much greater detail. However, this is just a very kind of high level executive summary for you. You'll also see a buyer power score on each of the categories. This is meant to help our clients quickly understand whether or not this is a good time for us to go to market at the present moment, given the external market conditions. So you'll see a couple of numbers here. Firstly, there will be the current condition, which is based on a sliding scale of negative to +5, which will help us indicate whether it's currently a buyer or a seller's market. In addition, we also compare that to the historical and forecast analysis, so you can actually see how your buying power is changing over time. Is it increasing? Is it decreasing? And how are we expecting it to trend next year? So given all of that, we basically take a comprehensive view of all of the factors that contribute to buyer leverage, and we'll provide either a buy now or a buy later recommendation. What this means is it's either a good time or a good year for us to go out to market this year, or we may want to hold fire and go out to market next year if it's a buy later recommendation, given that the current conditions are not as favorable for buyers. So this is a really great and easy way to kind of assess the opportunity and see, what categories you may want to approach this year. Next up, you're going to see a list of recent developments. So this is going to act as sort of a news feed for this market. It can encompass a variety of different topics or global or national trends that may have some sort of impact on this market. So it can include things like supply chain issues, labor shortages, political issues, as well as things like emerging trends and technologies, or even mergers and acquisitions that may be changing the market share concentration in this space. So it can kind of encompass a variety of different topics. And what you'll see is that they are all going to be categorized as either positive, neutral, or negative for buyers. Not only will we kind of provide a quick synopsis of what those topics and trends are, we will also highlight which sections of the report it impacts. So you can quickly jump into those hyperlinks, which will take you to that part of the report to give you more information. Okay. Now, next up, we're going to have a SWOT analysis section that rounds out the executive summary chapter. We found that most of our clients are typically sharing some form or variation of SWOT analysis when they're putting together their internal category strategy template. So this is a really quick and easy way to highlight the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats within any given market to help you guys justify your decisions to decide on whichever go-to-market strategy that you guys choose. And lastly, I do also want to point out our new global chapter that we've actually added in as of December last year. So regardless of whether you may be actually sourcing any materials or services globally, there is some information in here that kind of gives you a more comprehensive view of global supply chain that may be valuable to just have as background knowledge. So this global chapter will give you more information on global market approach, whether this is typically a category that's approached globally, locally, or some hybrid of the two. There is also more recent developments that touch on any hot topics or trends that may impact sourcing, not just in the United States, but in other regions of the world as well. And then lastly, there is some information on global supplier pools, so you can get a more holistic view of how many suppliers there are that operate in this space in those regions of the world, to help identify any potential outsourcing opportunities. And then going back to the main report here, if anyone would like to get more information on the buyer power score that we discussed earlier, there is a whole chapter on the buyer power score components, which will actually help break down the various factors that we take into consideration in order to come up with that score. So you'll see all of the various components. Obviously pricing is a big part of that, but we also look at things like switching costs, product specialization, supply chain risk, to give a more comprehensive view. And again, all of these factors are always hyperlinked, so you can jump into any of those sections to get more information around that particular chapter. Now that we've gone over just kind of the summary of the reports, one of the kind of easiest use cases, or most, I guess, actionable use cases that's super easy to use for these reports is helping our clients identify new suppliers. So whether you are, just looking to assess the market to determine who are some of those major players that have, come into the market since you last reviewed this category, or if you're looking to replace an incumbent. For those of you who might be, wanting to get more information on the supplier market, our reports have a supply chain and vendor section that gives you a view of the top suppliers through this really simple table. So we have a top supplier table that usually identifies the top 10 to 15 suppliers in any given market, which will serve as a really great starting point to identify who the major players are. It is based on US market share, so these are typically your largest national suppliers. We will also point out their operational size, whether they are a global company, whether they're national or a little bit more regional, as well as where they're headquartered. Here you can also see their current performance and financial health. So you can see whether they are gaining or losing market share in this particular market. And if they are a public company, you'll get a quick assessment of their financial risk. So you'll either see high, medium, or low here. If you see a company that has a high risk level, that is going to indicate that they are at risk of bankruptcy within the next 24 months or 2 years. And it's based on their last 4 quarters of financial statements. So a really good way to kind of identify any red flags with either companies that you may already be working with or companies that you may be considering to partner with in the long term. Further in this chapter, you're also going to find more information that talks about vendor risk, as well as a number of other risk factors. So here we do touch on the supply chain risk. So not only do we look at who the suppliers are of this product or service, we also will look upstream at the first and second tier suppliers. So these are your suppliers, and then their suppliers, to help identify whether there's going to be any major risks within that entire supply chain. Next, you're also going to see a list of ESG trends. This will touch on a number of environmental, social, and governance issues. So looking at things like controversy, anti-corruption, benefits, efficiencies, and just kind of identifying both what the current vendor or what the current leaders in the space are doing, and also where there may be room for improvement. So if these are initiatives that are really important to your state, these are some really great questions to be able to ask your suppliers to see if they have those initiatives on their roadmap. We also provide some supplier diversity information. So we do present the percentages of suppliers that fall under each of these 3 ownership categories to identify the level of opportunity you may see when you're approaching this category as opposed to others in the overall sector or economy. And then lastly, to help identify some additional risk factors, we do also touch on imports. So we look at where some of these major imports are coming from to assist with, producing this product or service, as well as any regulations on both the state and federal level that may have an impact on this category. Now going back up to the top, you'll see that we have a pretty detailed pricing section. So pricing is obviously a very important consideration for anyone within procurement or sourcing, as you guys may be approaching negotiations with your suppliers. So we do provide a lot of detailed information around pricing in general that will help you have a really clear, detailed, and comprehensive understanding of where you may have leverage or how you may be able to scrutinize certain supplier proposals further. So in the pricing section, firstly, you'll see that, as we hover over that chapter, there's quite a lot of content in that chapter. We're going to go through all of the breakdowns of cost structure, talk about things like labor and wages and different price drivers. If you don't have the time to go through all of the finer details, I would definitely recommend that you check out some of those key takeaways at the very top of each of these chapters. This will quickly highlight some of the major kind of talking points, whether these are red flags or areas where it may be advantageous for buyers. You'll see that these are color coded. So there's going to be some quick talking points. Anything in green is going to have a positive impact on buyer power. Anything in red with the exclamation mark is going to be negative impacts. So if you only have a few minutes before you're running into an internal meeting, definitely recommend that you just check out at least some of those key takeaways at the top of each chapter to help you get a kind of a basic understanding of the current market conditions and what are some things you may want to call to attention for your internal stakeholders. From here, you can start diving down into the details. So at a glance, this is going to focus on some of the key pricing data points that we're going to discuss in this chapter. So a couple of things I want to point out here. Firstly, there is some information on price trend and price forecast. The price trend is going to give us a historical analysis of pricing changes over the last 3 years. And that percentage is an average rate of annual change. So what that's telling us is that the pricing within this particular market has been increasing approximately 4.4% per year over the last 3 years. Similarly, the price forecast looks forward into the next 3 years, but also identifies an average rate of change here. This in particular is an area that our clients are typically utilizing to help benchmark any supplier increases and kind of decide whether or not those increases are warranted by market conditions or if they are significantly higher than what is presented in these reports. It'll give them a little bit more leverage to negotiate back. Now, because these are 3-year averages, I do want to mention that if you would like to get a more year over year view of the pricing changes, you can actually go ahead and click on this data table. And if you click on view data screen, this will actually provide you a even more historical kind of analysis on pricing. So it's going to go back the last 10 years and then go forward into the next 4 and essentially break out for you the benchmark or national price within the space over each of those years, as well as the rate of change. So you can actually see, which year there was more pricing volatility. And then next up, you'll also see a vendor cost structure table here, which is really helpful to kind of give us an understanding of what percentages of your vendors' revenues are going towards each of those line items. So in the spirit of helping to scrutinize, proposals, this will really help us kind of figure out if there is, wiggle room for negotiations depending on what those profit margins look like. And then B, if there are certain increases that are coming down the line to you, whether or not they are justified by the current conditions in the labor market or in the raw material purchases. So once you get an understanding of those percentages breakdowns, you can then go through the pricing section to really dive deeper into the details for each of those line items. So firstly, we're going to be presented with a market pricing scale. This is just a national average. We're going to provide you with a range of sort of the high versus low in terms of pricing for this market. We will also determine or help point out what are the factors that might lead to higher or lower price. So depending on the requirements that are necessary for your state, where on that scale or range you may fall. Next up, we're going to break down the wages and labor portion of pricing. So what we do here is we look at some of the major roles and occupations that are associated typically with this category, whether it's a product or a service. And then for each of the occupations, we're going to provide this geographic wage map, which helps us map out the wage differences depending on what region of the US you're sourcing from. So you can jump into or hover over the region that's closest to where you are and kind of determine what the average and the ranges are for labor cost. Next up, we're going to also talk about the standard pricing models within this category. So sometimes there's maybe one that's industry best practice. Sometimes there's more than one. So if there are more than one, we'll provide a breakdown of each of those, the pros and cons of each as well. So you can make an informed decision on what is going to be most appropriate or favorable to your project. We'll also touch on things like total cost of ownership, whether there's any other fees or costs that are typically associated with this category that you may want to keep in mind. And then lastly, on this page, we'll break down further some of those major input costs and external demand drivers. So we've looked at wages, but we'll also look at, overhead costs, or for any products, perhaps raw material purchase costs, to kind of see where those are individually trending and how that overall impacts pricing for the end buyer. We'll do a similar analysis for the external demand as well. And the idea, again, is to kind of provide a very comprehensive understanding of both supply and demand issues that may impact this category. It looks like we may have a question in the Q&A. Let me just pull that up really quickly here.
Yeah, it looks a question about, is this real-time data? So I guess how often is this information refreshed?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it is, all of reports are reviewed on a monthly basis. Typically that is or at a minimum, it's on a monthly basis. There are certain instances where there's a lot of volatility within a given category because of, something that's happening, which might lead to a slightly more frequent update schedule. But for the most part, all reports are reviewed at least monthly. To determine if there's been enough change in that market for us to warrant an update to certain sections of the report. It doesn't necessarily mean that every single report is updated every month. It just depends on the category itself and what's happening. So if there's been a big merger or acquisition in that space, we may update the vendor section to reflect the new top suppliers in that category. Okay, any other questions so far?
Looks like we have another one here. In the case of petroleum, do you use OPIC to determine the trend?
That is a good question. I am actually not 100% certain of the exact source for that. I know for the most part, we do use producer price index for a lot of our kind of price driver information. I would have to check with the analysts on that one, unless Kalia, if you know at the top of
Not
your
off the
head.
top of my head. I don't know exactly what sources we use. But what I was going to say is I'm going to ask the analysts, and we can get back to you via email if you just let us know what the best email address is, or we can share it with you, Chadwick, if you want to share with the group.
Yeah, that sounds fine.
Perfect.
Yeah, that question is submitted by anonymous attendee. If you'd like to give us an email address, we can definitely get an answer to you.
And speaking of sources, I think just kind of along the same track, we're a secondary research company, so we do use a variety of different sources that our analysts then kind of collect and then analyze to produce a lot of the different data points that you're going to see in these reports. So, we use a lot of government data sources as well as industry associations, trade publications, company financial information. So the sources may vary a little bit from report to report depending on the category. But if anyone's ever going through a report and you're curious about where a certain data point comes from, you can always reach out to myself or Kalia, and we can always find that out for you through the analysts, because they'll have all of the sources and methodologies listed on the back end. I'm more than happy to share that with you to be fully transparent and make sure that you're comfortable with the information. I also actually see a quick question in the webinar chat about whether these reports provide, or whether we provide reports on categories only, or if they can be more specific with part numbers. So it is all category focused. It doesn't necessarily go down to the level of like SKU numbers or anything. But what we do is we look at the general product or service category as a whole, and we'll provide information on market insights on, that entire category, with sometimes information on, factors that may contribute to higher or lower pricing, which may touch on some of the things like the requirements or even volume. And then I also see another quick question in the webinar chat, whether if there is a certain good or service is unavailable, can one be requested? So we are always taking feedback on, the new reports to add to our collection. So we certainly welcome any feedback that you have. Again, if you're struggling to find something, feel free to reach out to Kalia and myself. Sometimes it's perhaps a case of classification. We may have something that is either a good fit or a good proxy that we can share with you. If it is a category that we don't currently cover in our collection, we can always feed that back to our production team for review to determine if it's something that's feasible for us to add in future. Obviously, we can't guarantee that every request will be added, but definitely that feedback will help us kind of get a gauge on what our clients are missing from the resource. So definitely feel free to send that over to us. Okay. All right. So let me go ahead and I'm going to jump into the last chapter, since we've gone through a couple of use cases already, kind of touching on the pricing and kind of supplier chapters. The last chapter we're going to go through is the business requirements. So this chapter actually houses a lot of content that's that is meant to help with the later stages of a sourcing project and help with the execution. So what I mean by that is, when you're maybe ready to put out a solicitation or an RFP, or evaluating vendors, there's a lot of information here that can help save you a lot of time and just help make sure that you're asking the right questions. So in this section, there's information on vendor qualification. So for each of the categories, we'll identify some best practices for what factors should be considered for that particular market. So we'll touch on, the major factors that should be taken into consideration, the level of importance of each one, and then also how do we actually measure the vendor's performance against each of these factors. So it's a really great way to help standardize your approach if you are, evaluating several different suppliers with different capabilities to make sure that you're doing an apples to apples comparison and selecting the best vendor possible for that contract. Next up, there's an RFP section. So this is meant to serve as a checklist on the things that you should be including in an RFP. So obviously, I'm sure you guys have internal templates that you're working off of. So I would definitely recommend just going through these because they are category specific. So they'll provide some really good sort of best practices and foundational knowledge on what we should be including at minimum in an RFP to ensure that we are getting the right responses back. And if you see anything that might be missing from your existing template, the best and kind of quickest way of getting that information over, you can even just copy and paste it over to help supplement your existing RFPs, just to make them more effective and make sure that you're not missing out on any important data points. Oh, I think I see a quick question. What tab are we on? So we are on the business requirements tab. It's at the sort of the almost the very right of the report here. Okay. Next up below the RFP section, you're going to see a list of negotiation questions. This is one of our client favorite portions of our reports. And it can be used in a number of ways. The idea behind this is that each of these questions are related to a key issue or challenge that's typically associated with this category, whether it's a product or service. So based on those key issues, we give you a list of questions that you can use in your supplier negotiations. What they're meant to do is really help you suss out any vulnerabilities that those potential suppliers might have. Also, figure out what their capabilities are in servicing your needs. And then also just make sure that you're negotiating the best contract possible. So a really great tool for external negotiations. And then from an internal side, we also have had a lot of client success using these questions directly with their internal stakeholders. Even though this is towards the end of the report, a lot of times our clients will actually use these questions at the early stages of a sourcing project to go through together with their internal stakeholders or business partners to ensure that they are aligned on expectations and the critical requirements that are necessary for this particular project. And then last up, we have a number of vendor management tools here. First one being key contract clauses. These are meant to help mitigate any risks that the contract can pose to your organization. Obviously not an exhaustive list, but simply to kind of give some best practices of what should be included based on this category. We also will provide some key performance indicators or KPIs. Laid out in a similar way to the vendor qualification table, where we kind of identify, what are the typical KPIs that should be included, the level of importance of each one, and then the unit of measurement. In addition to that, we'll also provide some SLAs, so service level agreements. Again, all of these are customized to the category, and they are meant to help you just make sure that you are holding your suppliers accountable throughout the life cycle of this license. And with that, that takes us to the end of the report. And all of the information that I wanted to share with you guys today. So I will take a pause for now and see if, and kind of just open the floor up to any additional questions.
Let's see. For the moment, while our audience is kind of gathering their thoughts and seeing if they have any more inquiries for you, could you take us through the search process one more time? Let's use a fairly broad category to see what comes up when someone is searching.
Sure. So when you guys are searching, so let's say we're looking for, let's say we're looking for IT. Let's see what that brings up. I'm sure they'll, oh, maybe that's too broad. Like, let's say we want to look at like IT support. So I'm actually going to deactivate some of these. And make sure that we're looking at just the module that you guys have access to. So basically, when you search by a particular keyword, it will bring up either if it's an exact match for what we have in our database, that will obviously come up first. So you'll see just a quick synopsis of here of what is included in that report, as well as some of the major vendors and the standard coding systems as well. So if you guys do use any standard coding systems, that might be an easy way to identify if you're looking at the right report. From here, you can quickly assess whether that sounds like the report that you're interested in. And if so, you can jump into that hyperlink. If it's not exactly what you're looking for, you can then go down the list and see if any of the other related titles might be a good fit. And typically they'll take some variations of that keyword and provide some suggested titles.
Let's see. Here we go. Is there a report for electric school buses?
I know we have a report on electric vehicle charging stations. I believe currently that is our only EV-based report that's in our standard collection. But again, this could be a good example of something that if you guys are looking for a specific report, we can provide that feedback to our production team to look into whether that's a feasible market. It does depend on the market. If it's something that is very, very new, there may not be enough historical data for us to be able to put that information together. That's just an example, not necessarily specific to this request. The other thing is also we do provide some customized research to our other clients as well. And so sometimes we'll have some information in those archives that we can share with you. So if you guys do have any questions on anything that you're not able to find directly in our standard reports, feel free to reach out to us and we can kind of have a look and see what additional information we may be able to find.
We have a question here. Do you use NIGP codes in your standard codes? What is that system that you use?
Yeah, so we do. So there's a chapter on jargon and glossary at the right of each of the reports. And here it does list out the various standard coding systems that we use. NIGP is one of them, as well as the NAICS and UNSPSC codes. So you can also search by these codes. So if you know exactly, the exact code of something that you're looking for, you can actually search by those numbers directly in the search bar as well.
I have a question here. Is there a report for structured cable and wiring? I know there's a category report for electrical wiring.
Yeah, so we do actually have quite a few reports on different cables and wires, whether that's like electrical, fiber optic, I think mechanical, different wires as well. If none of those are what you're looking for in terms of structured cable and wiring, we can definitely take a closer look and see if there might be a better proxy for that. I did see another question, I think, in the webinar chat box, and it was in regards to some reports stated to buy, which reports must be purchased. So just to clarify, if you see, I'm assuming that you guys are maybe looking at this here. It says buy later, buy now. None of these reports cost anything. So if you're a NASPO member, you can access all of these reports. They're all available to you. This buy now or buy later recommendation, this is actually based on our buyer power score. So this is just giving you a quick indication of whether or not this is a good time to buy this particular product or service, either now or later. And it's based on the score that we had looked at previously. So it's just one of the data points, not indicating whether you actually have to purchase this report. Let's see.
Let's see, we have another one here. Do you use FSS GSA Advantage to solicit some of their suppliers? Go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry. Go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off there, Chadwick.
Oh, no, it's, are you reaching out? I guess it's asking, are you reaching out to some of the suppliers that the General Services Administration has their scheduled contracts with?
Got it. Okay, yeah, thank you for clarifying that. So no, the only so we are a completely kind of just unbiased third party. We don't reach out to any organizations to solicit suppliers to make it to our list. Our top supplier table is based entirely just on market share for any given product or service. So that is, all we look at in terms of, who makes it into our top supplier table.
Let's see. Well, one moment from any other questions coming in. Okay. Does this tool give you access to cooperative agreements?
No, so this is only a market research tool that looks at various category insights for any products or services that you may be purchasing. So I don't know if that's something else that NASPO offers, but it's not through Procurement IQ. And Chadwick, I did notice, I think maybe someone had asked for our contact information. Is that something that you will be sharing
Absolutely.
after the meeting, or should we drop it in the box? Okay.
We can go ahead and put it in the chat right now. But everyone registered for this training today will receive a follow-up webinar email that will have that information in it as well.
Perfect.
And if there are any questions or if anyone is having issues accessing their state's account, you can reach out to myself directly. Diane or Kalia are always there to help, as well as emailing research@naspo.org or membership@naspo.org. We really have several hands available to help out. Well, that looks like as good a place as any to call it for today. I want to thank everybody for coming out and spending some time with us and learning about this tool. Hopefully you can take it back to your daily work and make the most of it. Thank you to Diane for presenting this information, for Kalia for providing support. Everyone remember, this session does qualify for a contact hour for your continuing education units. If you'd like to get that certificate, just fill out the survey at the close of the webinar, or you can always reach out to me at cstevens@naspo.org. Everyone who registered for the webinar, as I said previously, will receive a follow-up email with contact information and other pertinent information. Feel free to respond if you have specific questions. The webinar chat and the Q&A boxes, all of that correspondence has been recorded. If there are questions that we could not find an answer for in the moment, we do have your question and your name recorded, and we'll be reaching out to you with some follow-up. With that said, thanks again, everyone. Everyone stay safe and have a great day.